ready, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. This is opening hearing for the Committee on Public Safety to address resolution number 130931 dealing with Notario fraud, authored by Councilman Dennis O'Brien and Maria Quinones Sanchez, who is not on the committee but is in the chamber with us. Brief remarks, and then I'll turn it over to the author of the resolution. It's my understanding that immigration forms the mosaic known as the United States of America. Our nation was founded on a welcome mat that said, "Bring us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free." This historic idea was founded in the tenets of Pennsylvania in particular, and it's interesting that in the early 1900s, immigration grew to about 120,000 in the 1900s here in Philadelphia. We are known as one of the more friendly places for immigrants to assimilate into America's rich culture. And I hope the results of today's hearing will make it one step better and continue to grow the immigrant population and welcome them into our society and become full citizens and participants in the United States of America. Thanks to immigration, Philadelphia reversed its trend on shrinking population in the city of Philadelphia for the first time in decades. So we are happy that this trend is now growing the city and creating good taxpayers, and we recognize that Councilwoman Sanchez and Dennis O'Brien as the co-sponsors of this resolution. Also, Councilman O, whose work on immigration is known to this council. And without further ado, I will turn it over to the author of this resolution, starting with Dennis O'Brien, and hopefully we'll convince Councilwoman Sanchez to weigh in on it as well.
Thank you, Chairman Jones. There you go. I'm still a newbie here. I have to be reminded to turn on my microphone. Thank you, Chairman Jones, and I'd like to thank Councilwoman Maria Quinones Sanchez for her help in putting this hearing together and working on this very important issue. I'm grateful to the Councilwoman and Jennifer Cates of her staff for working with me and my team to prepare today's important conversation. Notario fraud occurs when an individual provides immigration and other legal services that he or she is not qualified to perform. The fraud is committed by people who capitalize on a victim's vulnerability and ignorance of the United States legal system to offer substandard, false, or non-existent immigration services, often using predatory advertising language and fraudulent contracts. Notarios hold themselves out as qualified to help individuals obtain lawful status or assistance with financial matters, tax returns, etc. Many trusting and unsuspecting people often pay tens of thousands of dollars for what they believe are the legitimate services of a licensed attorney, only to fall victim to notario fraud. Many people who go to notarios are legally in this country on a real pathway to citizenship, or go to notarios to complete that journey. If these notarios do not file the paperwork, legal permanent residents and visa holders may lose their window of time to apply for citizenship. Our immigration laws do not have a fraud exception, and if you miss the deadline, you miss the deadline. This is perhaps one of the most troubling parts of this issue. Today, we look at the immigration scams, the unauthorized practice of law, examining the impact of notario fraud on Philadelphia's immigrant community, the response from appropriate agencies to enforce current laws, and what can be done to reduce future fraud. In November, when I introduced this resolution, I said my goal was to bring stakeholders into this room and have a meaningful public discussion about this problem and the victims who suffer and remain silent. I believe our witness list, which includes some very courageous and strong victims, will help us accomplish that today. And if you look at our lead testifiers, they are identified as victim number 1, 2, and 3. And sadly, after these notarios steal their money, and as I identified, interfere with their legal pathway to citizenship, they also intimidate them and say, We're going to report you to Immigration Services for deportation. Sometimes they prepare illegal documents. They'll just fill in applications with falsified information on the guise that they've already promised some of these victims benefits that they may or may not be entitled to. That in and of itself creates an illegal act that they were not aware of. So for all these reasons, we're going to have victim number 1, 2, and 3. And we've asked the media to be sensitive because it's very courageous for them to come forward, but we don't want to expose them to the real or perceived fears that have made them live in the shadows and be silent for all these years. They are truly representative of what this problem is. So we ask everyone to please respect their anonymity. We have an interpreter who is going to take their testimony and provide us with that interpretation so that we can all realize the importance of this issue. As I said, the witnesses that we've brought together here are from the Federal Trade Commission, from legitimate agencies that provide immigration services, the mayor's office, the DA's office, the police department, and the general counsel from the Friends of the Farm Workers. So we believe that this is a start. I think it's a good start, but we want to take this very important issue from the shadows out in the public so that all of the partners that we have here today will begin a new and important dialogue with the immigration community, which will benefit all of us as a community going forward. Maria?
Councilwoman Sanchez.
O'Brien, I want to thank you and your staff and all of the stakeholders for what is an important documentation of what is going on with our immigrant community in the city of Philadelphia. Short of comprehensive, and that's why the word comprehensive, of federal immigration reform, what you see is, what you will hear today is the creation of fraud and fear tactics and misinformation in a community that's extremely vulnerable. I want to thank the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Services and our Public Safety Director because, as they will speak to today during this testimony, any fraud or any scamming of anybody is a serious issue that we all need to be aware of. Notario fraud is one of the reasons why it's so effective is that culturally many of us come from countries where only lawyers are notaries. And therefore there is a tendency to have confidence in an industry that in places like Pennsylvania, where you do not need to be a lawyer to be a notary, creates the disconnect and the misinformation. So today's testimony will bring light to this. I think it's important to document as we work on many issues that Councilman O'Brien and others, Kenny and O, have all been part of, which is what are all the different ways that we need to protect this vulnerable community that we have said we want to embrace, and part of embracing them is understanding the impacts of what's going on in their communities, and if they don't come forward, we are unaware of all of the different ways that they are taking advantage of every single day. So as Councilman O'Brien said, we want to thank the folks who've come forward, the witness testimony that come forward, and the rest of the stakeholders. And this is one of many different things that we need to do in this city to make the city safe for everyone, safe for fraud from everyone, but also very welcoming to this new immigrant community that we appreciate and has, because of its growth, changed the tide, and Philadelphia is finally growing, and it's because of this community. And we want to say to them, and we want to make sure that our public policy reflects the fact that we want to embrace them in this city. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman, for your work in this issue and in this area. It's important work, and again, we can't overemphasize how our population in Philadelphia has reversed its decline and started to grow. Chair also recognizes Councilman Squilla and Councilwoman Blackwell, who have joined us in chambers. Are there any comments from members of the committee? Councilwoman Blackwell?
Thank you. I'd like to thank Councilman O'Brien and certainly Councilwoman Maria Quinones Sanchez for their work in this area. As you may know, we have these same issues in the African and Caribbean immigrant community. And in fact, we're having hearings tomorrow on ICE, the ICE issue, and as well. And so we are very, very glad to deal with this issue, and we're happy, we have a new immigration office at 41st and Poughton in West Philadelphia, 1 block from Market, and that will make access a lot easier for people in that area. But again, I want to thank the sponsors and the committee for it in considering this important issue.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Squire?
Yes, I also want to thank the people who are testifying today, and how, as we see this throughout the communities, we have it also done in the Asian communities, where we see the same type of fraud going on. And really what happens is they really prey on the people who need the most help. And the people scrounge up to get enough money to pay for a service that they believe is a legal service that's going to help them become legitimate. And then at the end of the day, they find out they're nowhere and they have to do the same thing all over again. So I want to thank Councilman O'Neill and Councilman Jones, the chair, O'Brien, I'm sorry. The Irish names get me confused all the time.
Well, yesterday, Councilman Pasco.
Oh. So, this is something that needs to be spoken about, needs to be heard out, and needs to have a solution. So I'm looking forward to the testimony today and hopefully be able to come up with a way to stop this from happening in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Now, we're going to remember that the first panel of witnesses are victims of this, and there is a degree of anonymity that they want to maintain. So they are going to hide their faces, and we respectfully ask the media to recognize that as well. Also, we're probably going to limit questions. There will be no questions to the first panel, and allow them to add their voice to the record, however. So will the clerk please read the title of the resolution and then the first panel?
Resolution 130931, authorizing the Committee of Public Safety to hold hearings to investigate Notario fraud and other forms of immigration consultant fraud in the city of Philadelphia.
So,
First panel of witnesses, victims 1, 2, and 3, and anyone else reading victim testimony. Please approach.
so some of this will happen through interpreters.
And Harry Zakaris, the interpreter, please approach the witness table.
Thank you all. Have a seat. Welcome. So there will be a microphone extended to victims 1, 2, and 3, and we will, where necessary, receive their testimony through interpreters. Please begin your testimony.
Por favor, empiece su testimonio.
Say it again. Can you pull the mic closer to you, sir?
Por favor, empezar su testimonio.
Buenas tardes, primeramente. Mi nombre es Wayne.
My name is Wayne.
Gracias por permitirme hablar y
Thank you for
contar mi
letting me
historia.
speak today here.
Nosotros nos dijeron de un señor que se llama Robert
We were
Coach.
told of this person named,
Lo recomendaron a él para
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing.
Repeat.
Oh, mi nombre es Wayne.
My name is Wayne.
Okay. Nosotros lo recomendaron un señor que se llama Robert Coach,
We were recommended by a name called Robert Coach.
que él supuestamente era supervisor de inmigración,
Supposedly he was an immigration supervisor.
que él supuestamente
He supposedly is
él iba a arreglarnos los documentos
he was going to fix our documents
rápido porque él sabía
Fast.
cómo llenarlos.
because he knew how to fill them out.
Pero todo eso fue una mentira porque
But all of that was a lie because
cuando él
when,
los hizo,
when he made them,
él dijo que nos iba a cobrar 8,000 primero
first he told us he was going to charge us $8,000.
y dijo que íbamos a pagar por partes, que primero
And he said
4,000
we would pay in parts. First, Payment $4,000.
Cuando nosotros tuviéramos el papel para las huellas,
When we had our fingerprints papers,
nosotros íbamos a dar la otra parte, que eran los otros 4,000.
we would have to pay the other part, which was another $4,000.
So, nosotros esperamos 3 meses
We waited for 3 months,
y nos llegaron el papel para las huellas.
and the papers for the fingerprints came.
Cuando nosotros fuimos, pagamos la otra mitad que habíamos acordado.
And when we went, we paid the other half, which we had agreed upon.
Y después esperamos 2 meses y nunca pasó nada.
And then we waited for 2 months and nothing happened.
So, nosotros tratamos de contactarlos con él
We tried to contact him,
y ellos no contestaban el teléfono.
and they would not answer a phone call.
Y tratamos y nunca contestaron.
We tried, and they never answered.
So, nosotros decidimos venir aquí a verlos a donde víamos en la oficina de él.
So we decided to go see him at his office.
Pero él ya no estaba ahí, ni su asistente.
But he wasn't there, neither was his assistant.
So, ellos se desaparecieron y nosotros no los encontrábamos.
So we couldn't find them, they weren't there.
So, nosotros tratamos de buscar investigadores privados,
Excuse me. So we looked for a private identifier,
y ellos encontraron la dirección de la asistente
and they found
de él.
the address of the assistant
y de él.
and his.
Fuimos a ver al asistente y le tocamos la puerta por varias veces.
We went to
Nunca-
see the assistant, and we knocked
nunca
on the door
abrían la puerta.
several times, and every time,
no abrían la puerta.
they wouldn't open the door.
So, esperamos y esperamos.
We waited and we waited,
Nosotros la encontramos atrás en el parqueadero.
and we found them back in the parking lot.
Y ella nos dijo que él
And she told us that he
le robó también a ella.
stole from her,
Que ella no tenía nada de culpa, no que él. Y que no éramos los únicos.
that she wasn't at fault, he was, and that you're not the only one.
Eran muchos más.
There were many more.
So, nosotros podíamos traerlos al juzgado.
And that we can bring him to be judged.
Entonces nosotros procedimos a ir a varios lugares para ver si nos podían ayudar.
We went to several places to see if they can help us out.
Primeramente fuimos a la policía.
First, we went to the police,
En ellos les dijeron que no podían hacer nada
and there they told us that they couldn't do anything
porque no era criminal el caso.
because the case was not criminal.
Entonces nos mandaron a otro edificio
So they sent us to another building.
y fuimos ahí a una corte civil,
We went there, it was a civil court,
supuestamente de robo,
supposedly for theft,
y ellos nos dijeron de que los mandaron a otro lugar, así que no
and
nos
they
podían
told
ayudar
us and sent
tampoco.
us to another place. So then
Fuimos a otro,
we went to another place,
ellos dijeron de que en ese lugar solo cubrían 8,000.
and they said that in that place they only cover 8,000.
Éramos 4 y eran 32,000.
We were 4, and that was 32,000.
So, fuimos a una corte más grande, la más grande de aquí.
So we went to a higher court,
Ellos nos dijeron de que teníamos que necesitar un abogado
and they told us that we would need a lawyer.
y que ellos nos iban a poner un abogado porque era muy caro.
They would provide us with a lawyer because it's very expensive,
Y que ellos nos avisaban.
and that they would let us know.
Ellos nunca lo hicieron.
But we were never notified.
Y entonces nos fuimos y tratamos de hacer varias cosas, pero no se podía hacer nada.
Then we went, and we tried to do several other things, but we couldn't do anything
Porque no sabíamos a dónde ir.
because we didn't know where to go.
Fuimos a varios lugares aquí y no nos pudieron ayudar.
We went to several places, and we couldn't get any help.
Y esa es mi historia y ojalá que
That's my story, and I hope
puedan hacer algo contra él porque
you could do something against him because
este país es tan grande y rico que no pueden dejar a personas así.
This is a big and wealthy country, and you just can't do this to people.
Dejar que hagan eso contra, no solo nosotros, con muchas personas.
Not only us, but many other people.
Y si no lo siguen, y si uno no hace nada, ellos lo van a seguir haciendo con demás
And
personas.
if we don't do anything, they will continue to do it.
So, ojalá que puedan hacer algo y
I'm
contra él,
hoping that you can do something
contra él.
against him.
Okay, esa es mi historia, gracias.
And that's my story. Thank you.
Sí, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Ciro Cruz y muchas gracias por tener esta audiencia.
Good afternoon. My name is
Ciro,
Ciro.
yo fui víctima de fraude de inmigración y esta es mi historia.
I went to the immigration department, and this is my story.
Al igual que mi amigo, yo fuimos con Robert Koch
Just like my friend, we went with Robert Coach
en la oficina la cual se llamaba South Philly Koch Investigation and Security Services.
in the office, which is known as Spirit Coach Investigation Services.
Y como fue, nos explicó y que él dijo que era supervisor de inmigración.
When we went, he explained to us that he is an immigration supervisor,
También incluso él estaba uniformado como si fuera representante de inmigración.
and he was also a representative of the immigration.
Le explicamos nuestro caso,
We explained to him our case.
él nos dijo que él podía ayudarnos.
He said he was able to help us.
Nos dijo, no se preocupen, yo sé cómo llenar las formas correctamente.
He said, don't worry, I know how to fill out those forms correctly.
Y nos explicó que teníamos que pagar $8,000,
And he explained to us that we had to pay $8,000.
lo cual nos dijo que necesitaba $4,000 al principio
And he said he needed $4,000 up front,
y los otros cuando nosotros recibiéramos las formas para ir a tomarlas,
and the other when we get the forms to go get
las fingerprints.
the fingerprints.
Entonces, esto sucedió,
Then this happened.
nosotros nos llegó las formas para ir a la oficina de inmigración.
The forms came for us to go to the immigration department.
Esta era la segunda vez, entonces nosotros ya le habíamos dado $4,000
This is the second time. We already had given him $4,000,
y a su asistente le dimos los otros $4,000,
and to his assistant we gave the other $4,000.
la cual ella fue con nosotros a la oficina de inmigración a
And
tomar
she
las
came
huellas.
with us to the immigration department to get our fingerprints.
Lo que pasó es que nos rechazaron la primera vez,
What happened was we were rejected the first time.
hablamos con él por teléfono
We spoke to him on the phone,
y nos dijo que en la segunda ocasión no seríamos rechazados.
and he told us that the second time around we would not get rejected.
Ok, y nosotros le dijimos, ¿qué pasaría si nos rechazan otra vez?
And we asked him, what would happen if we get rejected again?
Y él nos dijo, no se preocupen, si eso pasa, yo les regresaré su dinero completamente.
And he said, don't worry, if that happens, I will return all your money.
Nosotros confiados hicimos todo el proceso
So we had confidence, we went through the whole process,
y al final de cuentas
and after the whole story,
nosotros nos quedamos sin el dinero y sin los papeles.
we ended up without money and without papers.
Desgraciadamente esto pasa todos los días.
Unfortunately, this happens every day.
Mucha gente por miedo o por
Many people, because of fear or
ellos no van a la oficina de policía o
they
con
don't
algún
go to the
abogado
police office or
porque ellos tienen miedo de ser deportados.
another office because they have the fear of being deported.
Yo creo que esto no es justo
I don't think that this is just,
porque nosotros trabajamos duro por ese dinero,
because we work hard for that money,
incluso tuvimos que probablemente conseguir dinero.
and even we had to look for some money.
Fuimos a diferentes abogados aquí
We went to several lawyers here,
y muchos de ellos nos dijeron que el caso probablemente lo podríamos ganar, probablemente no.
many of them told us we could probably win a case or maybe not.
También fuimos a la estación de policía
We also went to the police station,
y nos dijeron que ellos tenían que investigar primero si era fraude o era que se habrían ido a bancarrota.
They said they would first have to investigate if it was fraude, fraude
Bankruptcy,
o
bancarrota.
bankruptcy.
Pues, desgraciadamente nos mandaron a otro edificio,
Unfortunately, they sent us to a different building.
hablamos con un detective,
We spoke with a detective.
él nos dijo que cuando él tuviera tiempo iría a buscar a estas personas.
He told us when he has time, he'll go look for these people.
Yo sé que muchos casos vienen primero como homicidio.
I know that many cases come ahead of it, like homicide.
Nosotros nos dedicamos y contratamos unos investigadores privados.
We hired a private investigator.
Ellos nos encontraron la dirección del asistente y de Robert Koch.
They found for us the address of the assistant and of Robert Koch.
Fuimos a ver al asistente,
We went to see the assistant.
hablamos con ella
We spoke with her,
y ella dijo, yo no tengo nada que ver.
and she said to me, I had nothing to do.
Él es
With it.
él es el culpable
He is the one who's at fault,
y él tiene récord criminal,
and he has a criminal record.
lo cual nosotros fuimos a hablar con ella, le hablamos al detective,
At the end, we spoke to her, and we spoke to the detective,
el detective nos dijo, cuando yo tenga tiempo iré a hablar con ella.
and the detective says, when I have time, I'll go speak to her.
Y ha sido más de un año y nosotros seguimos esperando
It's been
alguna
more than a
respuesta.
year, and we're still waiting for an answer.
Desgraciadamente cada día hay más víctimas.
Unfortunately, every day there are more victims.
Toda esta situación desgraciadamente es disappointed.
Unfortunately, all this happened.
Yes, lo que es peor del caso es no acerca del dinero,
And the worst part of it is not the money,
es la esperanza que nos dan.
it's the hope that they give us.
Mucha gente está esperanzado
Many people have hope
para obtener los papeles.
to obtain their papers.
Mucha gente trabaja aquí duro para mantener a su familia.
And a lot of people work very hard to maintain their family.
Yo estoy casado con una ciudadana americana
I am married to a U.S. citizen,
y mi esposa dice que esto no es justo.
and my wife says that this is not just.
Ella dice que este país es muy rico y tiene muchas leyes,
She says that this is a very wealthy country, and it has a lot of laws,
y yo espero que hagan algo en contra de estas personas.
and I hope that they do something against these people.
Muchísimas gracias por su tiempo y esa es mi historia.
Thank you very much for your time. Gracias.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Dornbush. I'm a staff attorney at Friends of Farmworkers, and I'm presenting the testimony of the third witness.
Excuse me, do you want me to interpret her? You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and would you please state your name for the record and begin your testimony on behalf of victim 3?
Sure. My name is Stephanie Dornbush. I'm a staff attorney at Friends of Farmworkers. I'm presenting the testimony of Edwin, who could not be here today. My name is Edwin. Thank you for listening to my story today. I could not be here in person because I was deported about a year ago, and I am now back in Guatemala, separated from my wife and my two little children. I lost $15,000 because I was lied to by somebody I trusted to help me with my immigration status, and because I wanted to do the right thing. I am sharing this story because I want this to stop happening to other immigrants. Several years ago, I went to a business in North Philadelphia for help applying for a tax ID number because I wanted to pay my taxes. When I went to my appointment, the owner of the business told me that I could get a green card if my employer sponsored me. I thought he was an attorney because he was offering immigration and tax services. He also spoke Spanish, and he told me that he had helped lots of immigrants get green cards, so I believed that he could help me too. I hadn't gone to his office in order to apply for immigration benefits. I just went there because I wanted to pay my taxes. But he was very convincing and talked me into it. He assured me that I would qualify and that it would be no problem. It sounded like great news. If I could get legal immigration status, my family's life would be so much better. So I signed some papers that he gave me. I didn't know what they said because I can't read or write in either English or Spanish, but I could tell they were written in English. The man just told me where to sign my name. A former boss from when I did landscaping work wanted to sponsor me for the green card. He thought he was helping me because he liked me and thought I was a good worker. Neither of us had any idea that I was not eligible. Over the next year, I made regular payments, a few $100s at a time, to the man from the immigration business. Whenever I asked, he told me that my green card was in process and that everything was fine, so I kept making payments. After about a year, when nothing had happened, I started to get upset. I asked him why I had not received anything yet. He told me to be patient and that he had everything under control. After I pushed him one more time, he told me he would get a lawyer to help me, and he arranged a meeting. The lawyer told me the same thing, that everything was going fine. That was the only time I met with that lawyer. My main contact was still the owner of the immigration assistance business, and I still thought that he was the one working on my case. I would still call him about the case, and I made all of my payments to him. Later, I went to Friends of Farm Workers about a different legal issue, and when I told the lawyers there about my immigration case, they explained that I was actually not eligible for a green card. I would never have paid all that money for something I wasn't eligible for. I had worked years to save that money. $15,000 was more than half a year's salary. Later, Friends of Farm Workers helped me request a copy of my immigration record from the government and found out that this man had never filed any kind of application for me. I do not understand why he charged me so much money or why he kept telling me that everything was going well if he never even filed the application. What happened to me next was a nightmare. I had an accident at my new job that destroyed my hand. I was high up in a tree, trimming branches, when a branch that we had just cut and tied with a rope fell down. I lost my balance and got my hand caught between the rope and the rest of the tree. So as the branch fell, the rope scraped against my wrist and sliced all the way through to the bone. My supervisor drove me to a hospital, but just left me there. I had a few surgeries to reconstruct the tendons and arteries that had been severed, but I got deported before the treatment was finished. I can barely move my hand at all, and I can't grip with it or pick anything up. It's nearly useless. I want you to know this part of the story because I have no education and I have only ever worked with my hands. With my injury, there is barely any work for me in Guatemala, and I can't earn enough to support myself. If I hadn't lost $15,000 on a fake green card, I would at least have something to live on. When immigration came to my house and arrested me, I did not understand why. I'm a good person. I'm not a criminal. The worst thing that I had done was come to the United States to try to take care of my family. I immediately suspected that the man who sold me the fake green card had something to do with it. My wife called him for help when I was arrested, and he told her not to worry, that everything would be fine. But that was another lie. Now I feel like my life is over. I've lost my savings, my hand, and my family. I'm separated from my wife and my 2 children, and I cannot find work to support them or myself. No one will hire a manual laborer with only one good hand. I occasionally work in the field spraying pesticides because it's the only work I can do with one hand, but it isn't enough. I'm asking the members of the City Council to do something to stop people like the man who took everything from me. My life is already over, but you can stop him from ruining other immigrants' lives. Thank you.
Since she's not the victim, can I, for the record, ask the relationship between your organization and victims like this, so that you can put that on the record?
Sure. We represent this client in other matters, and we've advised him about his immigration status. And generally speaking, and I think Art Reed will speak more to this, but we see victims of fraud fairly frequently, and we are able to advise them. We have some immigration attorneys on staff, and we're able to advise them about what they are or aren't eligible for.
Thank you so much for your testimony and your assistance in providing this for us.
Thank you for holding this hearing today.
All right. Oh, I guess we have no questions for this group, so we might want to bring the next panel up to testify. Do we? Is there one more? I thought we had 3. Is it 4? All right. Thank you, and can you state your name for the record? And
Yes, my name is Lonnie Villalobos. I'm a third-year law student at Villanova, and I'm a volunteer with the Notario Fraud Project.
Okay.
And I'm here to read testimony of a person who could not be here but provided his written statement to be read today. My name is Felipe, and I'm here today to talk about how I was a victim of notario fraud. I went to Solomon Multi-Services in November of 2011 for immigration assistance. When we went into the office and asked for the lawyer, he identified himself as the lawyer. We had a meeting, and he explained how we could apply for immigration benefits, what forms we needed to use, and had us fill out the forms. He told us that he was also an immigrant, and he likes to help immigrants apply for benefits. He told us that in 6 months, we would receive the immigration benefit. We signed a contract with him that said the services were immigration services. In total, he told us we had to pay $13,500. We had to pay $9,500 beforehand, and the rest we would pay after we received the immigration benefit. We agreed with this and paid him $2,000 the first day and paid the remaining $7,500 in several payments over the next few weeks. After 6 months, we asked Solomon what was going on with our application. He said there had been an error in the application and he had fixed it. We waited several more months and we still did not hear anything. We started to get nervous and tried calling Solomon. He started to avoid our phone calls. Sometimes he would answer, but he would give another excuse and say the application was still pending. A year and a half after we thought the applications were filed, we found out from immigration that they never received any application. Immigration told us we should have received receipt notices from immigration. We went to Solomon and asked him where these notices were, and all he showed us were the applications we filled out. This is when we realized that he was cheating us. We started to pressure him to return our documents and our money. He refused to give us our file because he said since we were not going to work with him anymore, he would not share the documents. He told us that if we stopped the applications and got a refund from him, he would not have to notify immigration that we were no longer doing our application. Nearly 2 years after we first went to Solomon's office, we were still waiting for our money. He is still playing games with us. For instance, he gave me 2 checks to refund my money and said that I should deposit them in a few weeks. I tried to, but the checks were bad. The account for the checks had been closed for some time. I could not believe that he was still playing games with us and not taking us seriously. It is unfair that he has been able to do this for so long without consequences. It was during this last summer we looked for help to do something. We found the assistance of the Villanova University School of Law Farm Worker Legal Aid Clinic. The clinic helped us to get help also from John Grogan, a partner at the law firm Langer, Grogan, and Diver, and Irv Engelsberg, another lawyer at the firm. We sued Solomon to get our money back. John, Irv, and Vanessa have been helping me and my friend. We are still in the process of trying to get our money back. He still tried to call me even after we filed the lawsuit to give excuses. I want to hold him accountable for what he did. I hope we can do this through our lawsuit, but I know it is not certain. I am very frustrated that he has been able to get away with this for so long. It is not just. There are others that I know that the same thing happened with Solomon, but they are too scared to come forward, or they do not believe that they have been tricked. I asked the Philadelphia City Council to do something more to stop people like Solomon from stealing money from immigrants. We are here working for a better future for our children. It is not fair when people like Solomon are able to continue stealing money from hardworking people like others and myself. Please do something to stop this fraud. Thank you.
Thank you for providing the testimony from the gentleman. Who is our next person to testify?
Francis Healy, Special Advisor to Police Commissioner Ramsey, and Monica Vaca, Federal Trade Commission.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming, and please be seated. You've been here before, so state your name for the record and begin your testimony, please.
Good afternoon, Chairman Jones and other members of the Committee on Public Safety. My name is Francis Healy, and I am a Special Advisor to Police Commissioner Ramsey, and I'm here to testify regarding Resolution Number 130931 and the impact of notario fraud and other forms of immigration consultant fraud. By way of background, in my position, I've had the opportunity to work with the immigrants and the immigrant advocacy groups for many years in the Philadelphia Police Department. It began with the drafting and implementation of the department's policy regarding immigrants back in 2001. It continued with my work with the department's Limited English Language, or LEP, policy in 2005. And to this day, I have regular contact with the immigrant community and the advocates through the U-Visa certification process. I'm the certifying agent for the U-Visas, which are designed to protect illegal immigrants that have been the victims of crimes. Despite all this work and my engagement with the immigrants and the advocates, quite honestly, I'm aware of the complaints regarding notario fraud. I did a survey amongst my department, and that word, that term, is honestly unknown to the police department. People are aware of fraud, but not this type of fraud specifically. And quite frankly, I found this very disturbing to me personally, based upon all the work that I've done in this area. But also as a police officer, I know out there that there are criminals actively preying on a small group of people based upon their ignorance and fears. I find it reprehensible. However, based upon my experience, not very surprising. I understand the reluctance of some of the immigrant community to come forward when they've been victimized. It's often very hard in the U-Visa context for the immigrants to step forward when they've been the victim of a violent crime. So I'm not surprised that they would not report being the victim of a financial crime, especially when dealing with immigration matters. Some may have fears about the police department, and it's often difficult for any person to disclose that they've been conned in some manner. It's understandable why the police department has not been made aware of this crime, but it's not acceptable. So on behalf of Commissioner Ramsey, let me be very clear. Swindling or stealing from immigrants, legal or illegal, will not be tolerated by the police department, but we must be made aware. The department has a proven record of working with immigrant victims, and we will investigate any fraud perpetrated or targeted against this community, without exception. Equally important to these victims, the immigration status of any crime victim is irrelevant to the Philadelphia Police Department, and there will be no contact or communication with ICE regarding a victim status. Regardless of your status, if you are an immigrant and you are a victim of a crime, you should not fear the Philadelphia Police Department. We need your help to capture these criminals and avoid other immigrants from being victimized. This concludes my testimony, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are you testifying as well? No. All right. Before you start, what I'd like to do is open it up, because if I understood your testimony correctly, the term notario fraud is not a legal term that is codified under the crime code.
That's correct.
And so this is a terminology that has kind of germinated out of the instances on how notorious people commit this type of crime.
Correct.
So, okay.
Now, from what I understand, attorneys in different countries are the notaries in those countries. And oftentimes people, then they come to this country as immigrants, they believe that, this is my understanding, that the notaries here are somehow representing themselves as lawyers, and they become susceptible to become victims.
So again, based on certain cultures, notario actually means the equivalent of an attorney or a legal entity. And here it is a looser definition.
That's my understanding, sir, yes.
So that's the beginning of kind of reeling them into the service or lack thereof.
Correct.
And so then at that point, described by witness 1, 2, and 3, if you were just hearing of this, someone came into the office, what would you charge the individuals that committed this act?
It's fraud. It's simply fraud under the Crimes Code. There is a crime for it. Deception, off the top of my head, I can't think of the actual code, but it is the fraud by deception. I mean, so there is code, plenty of codes on the books, and we would investigate any crime if this came in. The problem is, I think many victims of this crime don't come forward. They're afraid to come forward for obvious reasons. They're afraid that we're going to contact ICE somehow, shape, or form as a victim. That's just not the case. We need them to come forward, and we will investigate any fraud that comes across our desk. We just need to be made aware of it.
So this fraud, is it a felony?
I believe so, yes.
And does it have anything to do with the amount of money?
The grading of the crime, I do believe, is tied to the volume or the amount of money, yes.
Well, what would be helpful to this committee is to, in your estimation, what are the charges that can be applied to this? And if it's a graduated offense based on the amount of money received by the theft of deception. So you would, based on what you heard, instantly charge someone with fraud with this type of occurrence?
Yes.
Okay.
fraudulent services. I mean, they're not providing the services they're portraying themselves to put out, yes.
Now, I was encouraged that individuals would be held harmless if they are courageous enough to bring forth this charge. They wouldn't instantly be contacted by immigration. Because when we did the hearings on human trafficking, one of the reasons a lot of people were reluctant to go forward was, yeah, you can go forward, but you're here illegally and you'll get deported. And those kinds of intimidations have been deemed as a crime in and of themselves.
Right.
And is there any way, working with the state, that could
Let me be very clear. Since 2001, when Commissioner Timoney implemented our departmental policy regarding immigrants, and up through Mayor Nutter's executive order, the status of a victim is irrelevant to a Philadelphia Police Department. We could care less. We want to know if you're a victim of a crime. Come forward. We're not calling ICE. We're not notifying ICE. ICE is not in any way, shape, or form in the picture when you are a victim of a crime. And that's important. I mean, that's important that that message gets out there because, like I said, I'm a police officer. That's my, when you cut down, I'm a cop. I want to know who's victimizing these people because they're being victimized based upon their ignorance and their fears, and that's reprehensible.
Again, I'm encouraged by that fact, but what my question speaks to is that when you intimidate someone in this manner, that you will be deported, and that fear of deportation is used. There is a particular crime that people in human trafficking are now associating with that type of intimidation.
Right.
Whether it is we will harm someone at home, in your home country, or whether it is we will get immigration to deport you. It is some type of intimidation
Right.
that has now been equated to a crime, and I don't know if you're aware.
Well, it would cover witness intimidation because these are the victims that would be coming forward, so any intimidation for them not to come forward would be a charge of, the best of my knowledge, I'm sure the DA could probably expand upon this, but be a charge of witness intimidation in addition to the underlying offense. Yes.
Are there questions? Councilman?
Lieutenant, the first thing that impressed me, and I'm very grateful for your clarity on the police department's position, was that it should not matter what a person's immigration status is. A crime is a crime, no matter where it's committed. And I, again, thank you for your clarity of purpose. In your testimony, you expressed your outreach to the community. Can you please describe that and how you have built trust with the immigrant community and how you think we can improve upon that if possible?
I'll try to do it in a nutshell. The first major contact we had was when the department was audited back, I believe, in early 2004 or late 2003 regarding our LEP, which is Limited English Language Access Policy. Under the Justice Department, it's a civil rights violation for a department or for a government agency not to have access to those who can't speak English. Our policy, we had a policy in place. It was very weak at that time. I worked hand in hand with the Justice Department and with a lot of the immigrant advocacy groups to develop a policy for the Philadelphia Police Department on how we handle people that can't really speak English or can't communicate with the police. As a result of a lot of that work, and it took a great deal of work, the Philadelphia Police Department policy has been recognized as the national model. It's been replicated in other places, and other police departments have basically adopted the same type of policy. It's very comprehensive, it's very thorough, and I'm quite honestly very proud of the work we did on it, but I did that with a great deal of help from I couldn't have done it by myself. I did it with the help from the advocacy groups, and I think the work that I did with them since that period of time, I think they have a level of trust with me. If I say I'm going to do something, I'll do it. Like I said, there's always anomalies that go on out there, and we understand the problems. But I think I have a very good relationship with the advocacy groups. I deal, quite honestly, very, very frequently with many of them when it comes to the U visas. And the Commissioner Ramsey has been very clear that he does not want the Philadelphia Police Department to be the first hurdle that an illegal immigrant who has been a victim of a crime. So we certify. There's only been a handful that I've been unable to certify because the underlying crime didn't meet the federal standard. But we go to great lengths to make sure we certify almost every U visa application that we get that we can.
since this is an informational hearing, what should a victim do if a crime is committed against them?
The first thing is you need to contact us, the police department. Call 911, have a police officer come out there. We have facilities and resources in place if you can't speak English. The biggest thing I really want to communicate from this hearing is to make sure that the victims of this crime or any other crime, who are legal or illegal, need to contact the police without fear. I know there's a cultural barrier between us and a lot of the immigrant communities from the police departments and or from other countries, and the misconception that we have a relationship with ICE. We do not. We're concerned about victims in the city because we need to get the bad guys. That's my job. And when I find that people are being victimized, I'll be honestly, it's upsetting.
One other question, or a couple, but one of the complaints that's been related to us is that there is a dollar threshold. Victims are being told you have to hit a certain threshold in order to start an investigation. Can you tell us if that's myth or reality?
I'm not all that certain, to be honest with you. A fraud is a fraud. Now, the classification or the grading of the crime depends on the value, okay? I will look into that and I'll report back, but if a fraud, regardless of the value, it doesn't mean we would throw you out and not investigate it. It depends on what the charge may be. The charge may be, I'm not really sure. It could be a misdemeanor one going up to maybe a felony, depending on the grade or the value of the stolen amount or the swindled amount. So off the top of my head, I'm not in charging, I'm not operational for quite some time, but I'll look into it and I'll get back to you. It's written clearly in the statute, I know that.
And understanding that Notario fraud is new, and that's why we're having these hearings, and you were very candid about the police department's position on this. Have you done any research in other departments across the country as to standards for training? And if so, can you inform the committee?
I have not done any. My plan is after this hearing, once we, in addition, are moving with the mayor's office, I'd like to put something out. Like I said, this is not a new crime per se. It's a new type of crime. There is plenty of statutes on the book. I just need to make sure that my investigative units and my responding officers are aware. So quite honestly, what I was planning to do is put a teletype announcement out to my troops, just letting them know that this type of crime exists, what's going on out there. And it's a very small niche, so not a lot of my police officers or detectives will probably be faced with this. But some of those detective bureaus that are in high population immigrant communities should be made aware, and that was my plan.
And perhaps you can consider in your perusal of that issue, as we recognized in the discussion on arrest for small amounts of marijuana, that there is a separate misdemeanor that's equivalent to the penalty for a summary. Perhaps one of the discussion points that we should have is whether there should be a penalty that reflects this specific type of crime, since it is unique.
Well, that's a call for someone.
No, I'm just saying we should, in your perusal, if you find that those penalties are inappropriate in the charging or enforcement provisions, maybe we should.
I believe the charging, quite honestly, from what I recall, the statute is well written. I think that doesn't need to be adjusted. I think the issue here is really relaying or communicating the intimidation aspect of it. The intimidation or witness intimidation is a compounding factor. I mean, not only are they petrified to come to the police, now they're petrified because they're being given false accusations or threatened of some type of, police action is going to be taken against them. That's witness intimidation. And that's something, that's an egregious crime that needs to be compounded with or added to the underlying crime. So, I mean, I'll look at the statutes and see whether or not a specific category would benefit this, but I'm not sure. I'll look into that, though.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilman. A couple other questions. So, if I understand this correctly, do we, at this point today, do you have any information on actual complaints, the number of them that you've received and followed up on?
See, the problem is trying to identify this type of fraud. Like I said, I'm sure people have come forward, but I can't quantify exactly this type of fraud. It may come across just as a fraud and be categorized as such, so I couldn't distinguish it from an elder abuse fraud or anything other type of fraud for that matter. But it's something I'm going to look into. I'll look into it to see how best we can track it, if possible.
Well, we've heard testimony, and we'll have testimony from advocacy organizations that are kind of familiar with this process, and maybe we can seek guidance from them on how to identify these kinds of issues, and in addition, come up with, they probably are familiar with known actors that have, I mean, this is probably not the first time,
Right.
victim 1, victim 2, or victim 3, the only people that were, this crime was committed against. So probably by working with a, for lack of a better word, I hate the word task force, but at least advisory group of folk that deal with this every day.
Well, let me just say this. I work on a regular basis with many of these advocates, and I ask them, and I would ask them publicly, if they have any issues or they know of this, bring it to my attention, and I will direct it to the proper detective division without any doubt, and I think they can rest assured that they can relay to their clients that the immigration is not going to be involved. So if they should have any information, I'd be happy to accept it and move it to the right investigative body.
Would you, do you know if there are any licenses that are required for this type of practicing of immigration? I don't know.
Well, I thought that myself. The two issues that come to my attention, number one, you have to be a licensed notary, first and foremost, and then you need to be, this is the practice of law, so you need a law license under state law. So those are the two issues that I see most glaring, that not only would these individuals be guilty of the fraud, the underlying, there's other violations they could face as well for the false practice of law and such.
I know we have at least one immigration lawyer that will testify today, and I was wondering if this is such a specialty that we might want to further look at least in our licensing procedure, a codification of that particular service. And so for those of you who are listening and can add that to your testimony, whether or not that is a recommendation that we would have in this information gathering session. Councilman.
Last week, we introduced a ordinance that calls for certifications and professionalizing of anyone providing immigrant services. We've given a copy to the administration, and again, this is a new conversation, so we're looking for that input. But, Mr. Leader, you asked me not to make comments, so I can understand why you didn't know that I introduced it last week, but...
Well, great minds. So obviously, I would be willing to hear what your opinion of that kind of added license would be. I know you haven't looked at it, maybe, but I would be interested in writing, seeing where you would fall. Would that be something that would help you in pursuing individuals that committed this crime?
Okay.
All right?
Yes.
Fair enough. Are there any other questions for this witness? Thank you so much, and why don't you stick around a little bit? We may have to call you back. Thank you for your patience, and would you state your name and begin your testimony?
Thank you. My name is Monica Vaca. I'm an assistant director in the Division of Marketing Practices at the Federal Trade Commission. Good afternoon, and thank you to Chairman Jones, Councilman O'Brien, and I don't see Councilwoman Quinones-Sanchez, but I thank her as well for inviting me here to give oral remarks on the topic of immigration services fraud, or Notario fraud. Today I'm going to discuss the efforts of the Federal Trade Commission, which is the nation's consumer protection agency, to engage in law enforcement, consumer education, and policy initiatives to combat immigration services scams. Before I begin, though, I need to make clear that my remarks today are my own and do not express the views or opinions of the Commission or any individual commissioner. Beginning in 2009, the FTC embarked on an effort to build a comprehensive federal, state, and local initiative to combat immigration services scams. Key partners in the immigration initiative included the U.S. Department of Justice, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Executive Office for Immigration Review, 17 state attorneys general, and 9 city and county law enforcement agencies. In June 2011, initiative partners jointly announced 73 law enforcement actions and significant consumer education campaigns in multiple languages to give critical information to immigrants about how to avoid scams and to get the right help. At the same time, to facilitate and better coordinate future law enforcement actions, initiative partners agreed to use the FTC's Consumer Sentinel online database as the federal repository for complaints against immigration services scams. So let me begin talking about the FTC's law enforcement work by explaining how the FTC does business. The FTC is a civil law enforcement agency that enforces Section 5 of the FTC Act, which prohibits unfair or deceptive acts and practices. The FTC is not a criminal law enforcement agency. But that said, when the FTC identifies an egregious case of fraud, the FTC acts aggressively. We file a complaint in federal district court along with a request for extraordinary relief in the form of a temporary restraining order prohibiting ongoing law violations, an asset freeze of the defendants, both the corporate and individuals' assets, the appointment of a receiver or a monitor, and immediate access to the business premises with local law enforcement officials. In cases where the FTC believes it is absolutely necessary, such as in fraud cases, the FTC seeks these remedies ex parte, or without notice to the defendants. These remedies are extraordinary, and courts only grant this type of relief when the FTC can present compelling and usually a voluminous bit of evidence to prove the law violations. So today I'm going to talk about two cases the FTC has brought against immigration services providers, and I will note that in both of them, the FTC sought and obtained some of these extraordinary remedies and was able to get an order shutting down the deceptive business practices when it filed the complaint. These cases are illustrative of the range of scams consumers may experience, and I hope that by discussing them, people will learn how to avoid fraud and to report it to the FTC. In 2011, the FTC sued a company called Immigration Center and various related entities and their principals. The FTC alleged that Immigration Center set up websites to mimic official government sites and then used the fake sites to steer immigrants to their deceptive telemarketing operation. So the websites depicted American eagles, the United States flag, the Statue of Liberty, and they had URLs such as www.uscis-ins.us and www.usgovernmenthelpline.com. Of course, we know that USCIS stands for United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and the websites directed consumers to call a toll-free number that an automated voice answered, Immigration Center. Consumers were then transferred to a live person who answered USCIS or U.S. Immigration Center and identified him or herself as an agent, an immigration officer, or a caseworker. The sites also offered counseling and application forms. According to the complaint, the counseling was done by telemarketers who did not meet the legal requirements to provide immigration services. Adding to the consumer's confusion, the complaint alleged that the defendants charged fees for application forms that were the same amount as the government processing fees, which led consumers to believe that the fees actually covered the cost of USCIS processing. So consumers ended up paying for applications that were never processed by the USCIS for failure to pay the official processing fee, or in some cases, they were charged twice, once by the defendants and once by the government after the defendant forwarded their bank account information to USCIS. As a result of this case, the defendants were permanently banned from providing immigration services anytime in the future. Now, that case was national in scope and so had the clear makings of a federal case. Often we see immigration services scams that take on a more familiar aspect, a local storefront in an immigrant community. The following story is about a successful FTC law enforcement action that was substantially aided by a legal services organization that tipped us off to law violations. Legal aid organizations that serve immigrant communities, such as the Esperanza Center, operated by the Catholic Charities of Baltimore, often must assist consumers whose immigration status has been placed in jeopardy by unauthorized immigration service providers. For years, the Esperanza Center served consumers who had dealt with local immigration consultant firm named Loma International Business Group. Loma purportedly specialized in obtaining or renewing temporary protected status, or TPS status, for consumers from El Salvador and Honduras who qualified to remain in the United States legally. I want to repeat that, for people who actually qualified to remain in the United States legally. Their office near downtown Baltimore at times displayed a sign in Spanish offering the services of attorney Manuel Alban. After consumers paid the defendants their fees, Alban selected, prepared, and filed immigration forms with USCIS. Loma's customers, many of whom lacked English proficiency, trusted in Alban's supposed expertise. This trust was misplaced because Mr. Alban is not an attorney, nor was he authorized, nor was he or anyone at Loma authorized to deliver immigration services. And not surprisingly, they made mistakes. For example, a TPS renewal application prepared and filed by the defendants on behalf of a consumer was denied by USCIS because it did not contain sufficient information. The defendants billed the consumer an additional fee to, quote-unquote, appeal the denial, but then they failed to file the appeal. When the consumer requested the return of his temporary protected status application, the defendants told him that his documents had been destroyed. One Loma consumer fared even worse, landing in a U.S. detention facility for almost 11 months because of Loma's faulty immigration advice. In fact, USCIS denied or rejected more than half of the immigration applications filed by Loma. And in addition to harming consumers, Loma's unauthorized immigration practice caused a significant drain on the limited resources of the Catholic Charities of Baltimore. The Esperanza Center Catholic Charities Office brought Loma to the attention of the FTC and offered to assist in the investigation of the company. Both its referral and its investigation assistance were critical to the FTC's ability to build its case against Loma. Catholic Charities gave valuable background information about Loma, including where it was located, who managed the business, how it advertised its immigration services, and what company practices caused substantial harm to its clients. More importantly, Catholic Charities helped the FTC locate consumers who were willing to testify against the company. This is the cornerstone of every FTC case, is the testimony of consumer victims. Having advised and counseled many of Loma's former customers, Catholic Charities attorneys had developed trust relationships with their clients. A Catholic Charities attorney contacted numerous consumers who were harmed by Loma and encouraged them to assist the FTC. And ultimately, 5 clients of the legal aid organization gave the FTC documents and other evidence of Loma's deception and signed sworn declarations describing the harm caused by the company. So armed with these sworn declarations and other evidence uncovered by the FTC's investigation, we filed a federal suit in June of 2011 against Loma International Business Group and its owner, Manuel Alban. Again, the FTC moved aggressively against the defendants, filing a motion for an ex parte TRO, seeking an immediate halt to the defendants' deceptive business practices, along with an asset freeze, appointment of a monitor, and immediate access to the defendants' business premises to locate and preserve assets and business records. Ultimately, the FTC tried this case, and in 2013, the court ruled that the FTC had proven that Manuel Alban and Loma International violated the FTC Act. But law enforcement is not enough. In addition to taking law enforcement action, the FTC developed a consumer education campaign to, number one, help immigrants recognize, avoid, and report immigration services scams. 2, locate no-cost or low-cost immigration advice from authorized providers. At the recommendation of legal aid organizations, the FTC translated its consumer education materials not just into Spanish, but also into Chinese and Korean, into Haitian Creole, which was a first for the FTC. The campaign features radio public service announcements and a video, and includes brochures and wallet cards distributed through partnerships with USCIS, the Executive Office for Immigration Review, and legal aid organizations around the country that serve immigrant communities. But we needed to go further and to identify ways that consumer awareness might help our law enforcement efforts. So as part of the initiative, the law enforcement partners agreed that the FTC's Consumer Sentinel database, which is a secure online database, would become the centralized repository for complaints about these scams. So now, for the first time, these complaints are centralized and made easily accessible to Immigration Initiative enforcement partners and to hundreds of other law enforcement agencies. In addition to being a powerful tool for law enforcement to identify immigration services scams, the database helps agencies locate consumer witnesses and coordinate activities with other law enforcement groups. For example, the Pennsylvania Attorney General's Office is a member of Sentinel and can access, search Sentinel anytime. But this new tool only works if immigration services scams are reported. Immigrants may be hesitant to contact a federal agency to register a complaint, and to make the process more accessible, consumers can file complaints listing as much or as little information as they choose. In addition, the FTC strongly encourages legal aid organizations that serve immigrant communities to file complaints on behalf of their clients. This information helps law enforcement agencies identify patterns of complaints and at the same time reach out to an expert like the Esperanza Center, the Catholic Charities of Baltimore, to learn more about the scope and the nature of the problem. I thank you again for hearing my testimony and for inviting me to speak today on this very important topic.
Wow, comes to mind. This is extensive, and one of the things that comes to mind is that we need to be trained in identifying these kinds of acts. We deal with fraud all the time, but this is a particularly vulnerable population that is being preyed upon. And so one of the things that I would ask is, how do you help local law enforcement to identify these types of crimes, and is there training available?
Yeah, so two things. First, we do invite local law enforcement. Philadelphia Police Department certainly is invited to join the Consumer Sentinel Network and gain access to the database that we maintain. The second thing is we host on a quarterly basis a call with our law enforcement partners, local, state, national organizations, to swap notes, to talk about our cases in this particular area, and to talk about what are some successful strategies for prosecuting these types of actions.
Would you provide to this committee some of the classifications of crimes that are actually they're charging the perpetrators of these frauds with? That would be helpful. And also, is there a monetary amount that, it escalates it, or do you have a database that identifies multiple offenders that, this person, ABC Corporation, is a known actor that might be a Philadelphia firm that we can kind of keep our eyes on?
So our Consumer Sentinel database does keep track of that information when consumers put that information into it. So one of the fields that we ask people to identify is how much money they lost in a particular scam. And then anyone who is a member of the Consumer Sentinel Network and has access to the database can search. They can do a very easy search by zip code or by city to identify all of the complaints filed in that particular area. Another feature of that is that any law enforcement agency that is looking at a particular target as a possible target for prosecution, that law enforcement agency can place an alert on our Consumer Sentinel database so that other law enforcement agencies know that someone has already started to talk to witnesses and is maybe keeping a file. It just helps law enforcement agencies coordinate activities a little bit better.
Councilman?
Thank you. I would echo the chairman's sentiments and thank you for your aggressive, creative, and successful strategies on this important issue. And if I can be more specific, what does the Federal Trade Commission do with those complaints?
So all of the complaints that are reported into the Consumer Sentinel database are available for law enforcement agencies to search for. Many organizations around the country, including the FTC, are on the hunt for targets. Sometimes an individual complaint about an individual, often it is the case that individual complaints about an individual perpetrator, there will be no action on it because we receive so many complaints on so many different types of items. Part of what we are trying to do, though, is trying to identify the ways in which all aspects of the government have a role here. So there may be cases that are national in scope or cross state lines where a federal agency like the FTC might have a bigger role. There are other cases where a state AG's office might have a bigger role, and there are other cases that are for local law enforcement because they happen specifically, for example, within the municipal borders. The point of this is that we are sharing information, and by actually filing a complaint, an individual makes it possible, or an organization, a legal aid organization of any sort, makes it possible for someone to know and to do something about a problem.
Thank you. I know the chairman touched on issues surrounding training, but What can other law enforcement agencies do to bring more law enforcement actions?
Well, one of the things that they can do is they can join Sentinel, they can join our First Tuesday calls, and all they have to do is they could contact me directly. I will give you my email address. I think Miriam has it, but I'll give it to you. It's mvaca@ftc.gov. They can always join us there. We also host webinars in partnership with USCIS that we try to advertise broadly so that people can know how to recognize these types of scams.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. The wheel is been constructed. We just need to add our spoke to that wheel and maybe take advantage of the webinars and the conference calls on that. Obviously, you have a lot to deal with, but this is a particular type of boutique crime that we need to become more sensitive to. And so here's an expert in the field made available through this hearing, and we appreciate that resource, and hopefully we'll take advantage of it.
Thank you.
All right? If there are no other questions for this witness, thank you so much for both of your testimonies. Will the clerk please read the next witnesses to testify?
Lori Malone, Jennifer Rodriguez, Vanessa Stein.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and please be seated. Pull the mic closer to you, and can you can you state your name and begin your testimony?
Thank you,
Can you state your
Council.
name and begin your testimony, please?
Thank you, Councilman. My name is Laurie Malone. I'm a Deputy District Attorney for the Pretrial Division in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. We recognize that notario fraud is a very real and disturbing problem. We know that there are fake or fraudulent notarios who pretend to be qualified to help immigrants obtain legal status, help them draft wills or other documents, or purport to provide other legal advice. The consequences for these victims are significant and expensive. Not only has the victim suffered a monetary loss, but the underlying reason for seeking the services of a notario has not been addressed. For example, their will may not have been completed, the appropriate immigration papers may not have been filed, they have just been given bad legal advice. To be sure, we know that the victims of these situations are not limited to immigrants, but we do know that immigrants and non-native English speakers are the victims here. This is an important hearing. We know that there are many victims out there who have not reported to law enforcement the crimes committed against them. This is not a criticism, but a statement of one of the problems that we must collectively address. If cases are not reported, the police cannot investigate and we cannot prosecute. Therein lies the salient problem. We believe that a successful prosecution or a series of prosecution would send an important message to those who perpetrate this fraud. Therefore, we need to identify ways to bring appropriate cases through the justice system so that justice can be served. I have personally met with victims of notarial fraud, for advocates of victims for notarial fraud, and described the process by which complaints are made to the police, investigated by the police, and subsequently charged by the district attorney's office. Again, we want to help, and we hope that this hearing provides new ideas for all of us here to address this problem presented to us. I must emphasize that without cases, there is not a lot we can do within the district attorney's office. But I am hopeful that today's hearing, we will undertake a new strategy to identify the perpetrators and to prosecute this crime.
Thank you. Do you have questions?
Yeah. Okay. If there were cases, can you describe the process by which a case would come to the DA's office?
First and foremost, the complainant must go to the district where the offender or the crime is located.
The police district.
So the police district. So they must file a complaint with the police department. Once they file that complaint, the police department investigates that crime. Once they have enough for a probable cause, they submit an affidavit for an arrest warrant. That warrant comes to the district attorney's office charging unit. A senior DA reviews the warrant and ensures that there is enough to execute the warrant, and then we return the warrant back to the police department and they arrest the defendant. Once that defendant is arrested, then he is processed through the normal system. He's given an arraignment date and given a trial date.
Can you see any instance where the DA's office would do their own investigation and bring their own charges?
We have what is called an investigative division, and that division is very unique in that we only investigate certain kinds of crimes. For example, public corruption, crimes where we would have to do wiretapping and requires a DA to be involved. There are situations where there are complaints made to certain units within the investigative division that if it was complex in nature, that we would investigate.
Have you given any thought to the possible criminal charges that could be brought against the Notario?
There are already statutes in place within the Crimes Code. Under Title 18, Section 3901, there are theft charges. Under the same Title 18, Section 4101 involves forgery. 3901 is theft, and theft by receiving stolen property. And under, I believe, Title 42, Section 2524, those deal with the unauthorized practice of law.
You have very well articulated the problem of individuals coming forward to report these cases. And that's a huge obstacle. Can you identify any other obstacles that they could potentially face?
I believe Lieutenant Healy spoke to that, and one of the things that I believe that we can participate in is training the police officers at the district to identify that this is fraud. It's forgery, it's theft, it's unauthorized practice of law. It's not a separate crime. Notario fraud is not a separate crime. The elements to make out theft, elements to make out forgery, bad check, I believe one of the witnesses testified to the fact that he was given a check to reimburse him, and when he or she attempted to deposit that check, it came back with insufficient funds. That is bad checks. So all these crimes are already in place under our statutes.
As a follow-up to that, can you tell me what efforts could be made to protect the victim's status?
I believe Lieutenant Healy also spoke to that, but we do not share victim data information with ICE. I cannot make that more clear. ICE does have access to PARs, but it's very limited to offenders, to defendants. They do not have access to victim information. If there was misuse of that limited access to the police system, then that would be the basis for revoking their limited access.
Has there been any training in the DA's office with regards to Notario fraud to date? And would you see an opportunity to engage with the Federal Trade Commission given their recent testimony?
That's interesting because to the right of me, I have assisting me, Chief of Economic Crimes, Lisa Caulfield. And we just discussed that we may want to access that database. So that was a learning process for us. And I found that very helpful. We have training in our office that is ongoing, especially with our new DAs that come in during the fall. And during the first 3 years, they have ongoing monthly training about how to prosecute certain cases. And in that training, there's the training of how to prosecute theft cases, how to prosecute forgery, how to prosecute bad check cases, which are all the statutes, all the offenses that we would charge someone who committed this crime.
You also identified meetings that you've had with advocates. Can you perhaps amplify what the DA's office does to provide outreach to the immigrant community?
When I was first asked to meet with, I believe, members of the Notario Fraud Project, a Miss Vanessa Stein and Mr. John Grogan was at the meeting. And I did lay out, I believe, in some detail as to what we would need to do internally within the office to begin an investigation, but I also told them that any victim of this offense, first and foremost, must go to the police department and report the crime. Once they report the crime, they can investigate, and we can take over after they submit the warrant.
Thank you. I have no more questions. We've been joined by Councilman Kenyatta Johnson.
Good
Councilman, do you have
afternoon,
any questions?
Councilman.
Not yet. Would you like to identify yourself and present testimony?
Yes, good afternoon.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Councilman O'Brien, Councilman Kenyatta. My name is Jennifer Rodriguez, and I am Executive Director of the Office of Immigrant and Multicultural Affairs. I'm here to testify regarding Resolution 1309-31 on the impact of notario fraud and other forms of immigration consultant fraud. The Office of Immigrant and Multicultural Affairs, which we refer to by its acronym MOIMA, was established approximately 1 year ago for the purpose of ensuring the well-being of immigrants and other cultural and ethnic groups in the city of Philadelphia. Our goal is to ensure the successful integration of these groups into the city's economic, social, and civic life by ensuring that immigrants can easily access city resources and services, by helping them maximize their contributions to our economy, by ensuring that they receive equal and fair treatment, and by facilitating their civic engagement. Among the various initiatives the office carries out is the Citizenship and Naturalization Campaign. There are an estimated 50,000 legal permanent residents in the city of Philadelphia whom are eligible to become citizens but have not yet taken the necessary steps to naturalize. In order to address
Can you
this
say
gap,
that number one more time?
about 50,000.
Thank you.
In order to address this gap, our office has formed a working group consisting of immigrant serving organizations, which have been meeting since the fall in order to identify challenges faced by aspiring citizens and to develop solutions that can be implemented collaboratively. The group has identified three main challenges faced by immigrants seeking to naturalize. 1, the lack of affordable legal services. 2, the lack of English proficiency, particularly among seniors. And 3, the lack of reliable information about quality immigrant services. These gaps in the marketplace provide a fertile environment for notario fraud to exist. Fraudulent notarios take advantage of immigrants by claiming to offer affordable immigration advice in the client's native language and in a culturally competent manner. It is important to note that there are also well-meaning but uninformed notaries who want to genuinely provide affordable services to the community, but in doing so, commit mistakes or provide poor advice, thus jeopardizing the client's prospect for naturalization. Although our office has not received any complaints about notarial fraud to date, we know that it is a persistent, yet underreported problem within the immigrant community. Many do not realize that notaries are not attorneys and do not have the status in the United States that they have in their country of origin. Immigrants also fear they will be deported if they file a complaint. And even if they were willing to pursue legal action, they do not know who to turn to. We believe that working collectively with immigrant-serving groups, City Council, law enforcement, and in partnership with other groups, we can have a positive impact on this issue. The working group has identified the following goals. 1, to increase the availability of affordable immigration legal services. 2, to create a clearinghouse for information related to immigrant services. And 3, expanding a network of ESL providers. On March 29th, our office is partnering with the Philadelphia chapter of the Immigration Lawyers Association, HISPA, and many other groups for Pro Bono Citizenship Day, where attorneys will provide free legal services to immigrants that want to submit their naturalization application. 2 sites will be conveniently located in Center City and North Philadelphia. This is the first time the City of Philadelphia officially partners with these nonprofits in the annual event. As part of our efforts, MOIMA is committed to collaborating with City Council, law enforcement, District Attorney's Office, Police Department, and other city agencies to increase awareness within city government about immigration services fraud. We'll continue to work with our community partners to strengthen the network of pro bono attorneys and to identify resources that will help immigrants access affordable, quality legal services in a culturally competent environment so that there is no opportunity for bad actors to take advantage of vulnerable populations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for the record, Councilman Kenyatta Johnson is with us. Are there questions for the witnesses? Councilman Johnson.
Yeah, I just had a question in regards to, I guess, have there been reports of instances taking place, particularly, I represent the 2nd Councilmanic District in Southwest Philadelphia, which is a very high African and Caribbean population in the southwest part of my district, and I just wanted, are there statistics on a level of responses? I mean, statistics on the complaints as it relates to this particular issue and that.
Well, I will say that Moima, our office, has not received to date any complaints. We have met with advocate groups, and we, on a word of mouth, know that this is a persistent, it is an underreported problem, as we have heard throughout today.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilman. We both share a large immigrant population from African and Caribbean countries, and I would be surprised if they didn't face the same types of issues, notarial fraud, and other people with theft of services in effect by perpetrating that they are lawyers, that they can do these kinds of things. And so, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, Councilman. Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate your acknowledgement of the issue and look forward to, in future years, hearing how we evolve in identifying these types of offenses. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Would the clerk please read the next witnesses to testify?
Vanessa Stein, Felipe Weiss, Zen Jen.
Thank you all for your patience, and please come up to the witness table.
Only 3.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. Those testifying, we pull a mic to you, state your name for the record, and please begin your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Vanessa Stein, and I first want to thank Councilman O'Brien for inviting me to participate in this hearing and for having this hearing in the first place on the important issue of notario fraud. I'm a third-year law student at Villanova University, and I'm also the director of the Notario Fraud Project. And before I begin, I also want to thank everyone who has testified before, including the District Attorney's Office, the police, and the FTC, as well as, and most importantly, the victims. I am very excited about the interest in this issue and in the willingness of many different agencies and organizations to come together and the City Council to look for solutions that better protect immigrant consumers. I'm going to talk about 3 things today. I'm first going to talk about what notario fraud is and why it's so harmful. Then I'm going to discuss the Notario Fraud Project and what we're doing to reach victims. And then finally, I'm going to speak about why it's so important for the City of Philadelphia to work on this issue. As we've heard from past panelists, notario fraud is a form of theft. Notarios capitalize on confusion surrounding who can provide legal assistance. And we've used the word notario fraud a lot, and it has been explained, but I just want to reiterate the reason why we use this as shorthand to describe immigration fraud is because in many Central and South American countries, a notario público is a type of lawyer and often specialized lawyer, while in the U.S., the translation of notario público is a notary public, and we know that that is not a lawyer, but simply someone who is able to verify your signature for particular documents. I want to emphasize, however, that notario fraud is not limited to
fraud committed by Notario Públicos. As victims explain different schemes, as well as you've heard different scams by people who have testified today, immigration fraud can take many different forms. So there are individuals advertising and using this false cognate, but there are also businesses that are operating and are advertising immigration services and other multi-services. There's also businesses that do not advertise immigration assistance, and yet they are providing immigration assistance. And the project that I've been working on, the Notario Fraud Project, has focused on the Spanish-speaking community because that is the community in which I have experience working with. But as other council members have brought up, this is certainly not an issue unique to the Latino immigrant community, and scams can look differently depending on those communities. What makes immigration fraud especially terrible is that they exploit immigrants' desire to apply for immigration benefits, and they falsely assure them that benefits exist where none does. They charge thousands of dollars to file bogus applications or to never actually file these applications. They also prey on vulnerable immigrants who often have limited English skills and are unable to read a contract or the application in English, or they are also ill-equipped to ask questions about a provider's credentials. Finally, fraudsters also often prey on their own community, and so you will find that there are immigration fraudsters that are Spanish-speaking that are preying on the Spanish-speaking community, and that there are immigration fraudsters in the Asian community speaking the language in which they are defrauding. And this is especially hurtful because they use the trust that the immigrants have with members from their own community to steal money from them. I also want to emphasize that immigration fraud happens to all immigrants of all different types of immigration status, as you've heard today, including immigrants who are here legally and who are applying for renewing their benefits or applying to naturalize. There are ads by fraudsters to come in and they'll help to naturalize you for free, and these are businesses where there is no lawyer present, and yet they are operating an immigration service. These consumer fraud schemes devastate families. Based on interviews that we've conducted here locally through the Notario Fraud Project, scams have ranged anywhere between $500 to $10,000 and $15,000 in one case. For low-income immigrants, such as landscapers, agricultural workers, day laborers, this loss is very significant and can result in food insecurity, late rent payments, or even eviction. It also can lead to permanent immigration consequences, like barring immigrants from applying for benefits that they would have qualified for in the future. I've seen the consequences of immigration fraud firsthand. I started the Notario Fraud Project after interning my first summer at Friends of Farm Workers, where I had encountered clients who had been defrauded. And I was very upset by this. And when I looked for resources on where to send victims and what we could do about this, I did not find an organized effort here locally, and so I set out with the Notario Fraud Project with two goals in mind. The first was to really document the issue of immigration fraud by conducting interviews with victims, and so that's what we've done. The second is to help victims fight back against this fraud by having meetings with law enforcement, with the private bar, trying to figure out what are the legal remedies available and how can we begin to address this problem. And so to date, we've interviewed 24 immigrants who believe that they were defrauded. We've also, through a community-based approach, went out into the communities and conducted Know Your Rights presentations on your rights as consumers, and we've reached over 400 immigrants to date on that. We also have a hotline number for victims to call. And we've also been doing participated in some Spanish language radio as another way to try to reach consumers. And really the focus has been to try to reach folks who have been defrauded, because sometimes they don't realize that what happened to them is a crime. They don't realize that there may be resources out there. They don't know where to go to. And so we've gone to churches, community groups, on the radio, to people's homes, to talk to people one-on-one, to learn about what happened to them and to listen to them and to try to find a solution for them. Despite our best efforts and some real success, this is a student-run project and it has limited resources and scope. More legal assistance is needed for these victims because right now there is no local legal services organization providing legal representation to immigrants seeking to bring civil suits against these fraudsters. And you can bring a civil suit using the state consumer protection law, but unfortunately there's a gap in services right now. The project has been fortunate to have the support of Beth Lyon, who's the director of the Villanova Farm Worker Legal Aid Clinic, as well as Caitlin Berry, who's a visiting professor there, along with John Grogan, who's a partner at Langer Grogan, Diver and PC, and Irv Acklesberg, also a lawyer at this firm, to bring a civil suit against the Notario. We are representing 2 victims of immigration fraud and have brought this suit. And while that has been an important step forward, there are still people waiting for legal assistance. There's people that want to bring a case and there's nowhere to send them. This is why I am applying to try to continue this project, applying for funds to provide free legal assistance to low-income immigrants who've been defrauded after I graduate. But I know that representing victims alone is not going to be enough, and that's why the City of Philadelphia and our community partners also need to work together to find a solution. We've talked about how Philadelphia is a diverse city with a growing immigrant community, and that's absolutely right. Not only are we have a growing immigrant community faster than our peer cities, but we also have a very diverse immigrant community. Immigrants coming from Mexico, China, Vietnam, Korea, the Ukraine, Jamaica, just to name a few. It's also really important for the city of Philadelphia to combat this issue because the persistence of immigration fraud hurts the integrity of our justice system. When immigrants are defrauded and their fraudsters are not held accountable, immigrants lose faith in our justice system. They lose faith in our laws. And this is extremely harmful because immigrants may be less likely to come forward in the future to get the right kind of help or to report another type of fraud. It's also important for Philadelphia to be a leader in combating immigration fraud because over half of Pennsylvania's foreign-born population lives in Philadelphia or the surrounding 4 counties. And immigrants in these surrounding counties are coming into Philadelphia for legal assistance, and they're also being scammed. Therefore, Philadelphia can have a bigger impact, not only help the residents of Philadelphia, but also those living in the surrounding counties. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak at this important hearing. Holding notarios accountable will require the collaboration of our city, our local, state, and federal law enforcement, legal services organizations, community-based organizations, and the private bar. And while there's still a lot of work to be done on this issue, I know that Philadelphia can become a leader on this issue through collaboration. Thank you again.
Thank you for your testimony, and you do the legal profession in Villanova proud in your efforts in putting in this time for this worthwhile issue. We look forward to you passing the bar.
I do too.
Okay, we, next witness to testify, and then we'll ask questions of the panel. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Councilman Jones. Thank you to City Council members and Councilman O'Brien for inviting me to speak to you today on this important matter. My name is Philip Weiss. I'm the managing attorney at the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society of Pennsylvania. Highest Pennsylvania provides immigration legal services to low-income immigrants in Philadelphia and the surrounding counties. I've been in practice for over 15 years at Highest and other nonprofit agencies and have seen firsthand the impact that notario fraud has on the community and the havoc that it causes. We've talked a lot about what it is, and it is simply the unlicensed practice of law. And it affects every community, as you yourself mentioned. It affects the Latino community, affects cross nationalities, regardless. And it also is important to understand it's not just the undocumented population that's affected. We are all affected. So permanent residents who are seeking to apply for citizenship or naturalization are affected. U.S. citizens who are seeking to reunite with their loved ones are affected. And of course, immigrant victims of domestic violence are affected, as are undocumented immigrants. They are all equally affected. What are the losses? They're multifaceted. So first is the financial loss that we've talked about. And in my practice, I've seen individuals who've lost upward, from $500 upwards of $10,000. Secondly is the lost opportunities. As I mentioned in my written testimony, and as it was discussed previously, immigration is a form-intensive practice requiring the precise completion of forms and also a practice that is replete with deadlines. And these are hard and fast deadlines. And if you fail to meet one of them, you could lose your benefit for that status forever. Let me give one example. In 2000, under President Clinton, was signed the Life Act, which extended what was a provision of law called 245I. Enough to understand that this provision of law allowed certain individuals to seek residency status based upon their relationship with a U.S. citizen, spouse or parent or child or what have you. That provision of law had a deadline, April 30th, 2001. Now, I was in practice during that time, and my agency I was working with at the time worked with thousands of families trying to help those who were eligible to file timely, properly filed applications. Unfortunately, the very next day, May 1st, 2001, and until today, I still see individuals who could have been eligible for those benefits under that, but failed to because the notarios they went to never file them or filed them improperly. And so thirdly, and this was also mentioned before, was the real risk of arrest and deportation. By failing to file a timely application, one of the previous speakers spoke about temporary protected status. Someone who fails to file timely could seriously risk arrest and deportation only for the fact that they got improper service. Now, the reasons for the prevalence of notarial fraud are varied as well. First, we have the language barriers that was discussed. Second, there's a lack of understanding of the legal system, and fear and mistrust of governmental institutions, and the cultural barriers. Now, this is compounded by the fact of the lack of availability of immigration legal services to immigrants. And so taken together, this is a situation which desperately needs attention. And I thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And one more witness to testify on this panel.
Good afternoon, Chairman Jones and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me for this hearing. My name is Zen Jin. I'm a practicing attorney here in Philadelphia. I've been fortunate in that I've been involved in the immigration attorneys circles for the past 10 years or so. And through private practice, I have come in contact with many victims of immigration fraud. Mr. Philippe has eloquently stated many of the issues revolving around the victims of fraud. There's many ways these scammers try to avoid being involved in investigations, being caught. And how they do this is that attorneys are responsible for the cases. We enter our appearances on the cases. Our names are attached with the paperwork that are filed. Notarials and many preparers avoid putting their names on the paperwork. Ultimately, when immigration fraud is discovered, because the paperwork itself is full of fraudulent documentation, false information, but when it is discovered by USCIS and immigration, the only name, the only signature that is on the paperwork belongs to the victim. Consequently, the victim suffers long-term because they now have a record of committing immigration fraud with immigration. Immigration code frowns heavily upon any kind of fraud in the application process. By doing so, and by placing only their name on these forms and being associated with the fraud, the victims not only are victims monetarily, they are now looked at as potential person who committed fraud by immigration. And the long-term consequence of that is far beyond anything I think monetarily can be really valued. Many of the victims went forward to make these applications in the hope that they would become able to legally work. That is one of the key drives for many of my clients who has come to me who are victims. They told me, I did it because they promised me I can then work legally. I will get a work authorization document from immigration. However, what they don't know is that the preparers use completely fraudulent documentation, place their names on the paperwork, do not place their own name on the paperwork, and then send it in using their information. This kind of fraud is rampant. I think every practicing immigration attorney has seen many, many cases. I think it's something that really should be stopped. However, prosecuting these people will be difficult because immigrants oftentimes work under the table. They're paid in cash. The scammers are not going to give them receipts. Many times the payments are made in cash, and there's very little information about who prepared the documentation. So those are the difficulties that will be faced in trying to resolve these issues. But again, just in my years of practice, I've seen many victims. Most of them, again, ranging from anywhere from $500 to $10,000. $10,000 being more the norm because it's much easier to charge that when you promise them something that they're desperately trying to get. And many of the scammers charge a high fee under the guise of, well, it's a difficult thing to accomplish. We are the only ones that can do it, and therefore you should pay the fee. And many victims have paid the fees. Thank you again for having me here. I'm certainly happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you all, and we do have questions. I guess better communication with local law enforcement. We saw a perfect example of what the federal government is doing by way of these types of allegations. Without giving names, are you aware of companies that are notorious for these types of violations, or are they more or less mom and pop shops that set up a shingle and operate in the shadow of public notice?
I can speak a little bit to that. There are names, repeat offenders, if you will, that have come up constantly that are known within the immigrant community, within the immigrant advocacy community, where there are people that have been operating businesses for a number of years who have defrauded many immigrants over the years, and quite frankly, sometimes that's even more challenging because if someone's established in the community, it can be harder to get immigrant victims to come forward because they see this person as, well, they've been here for so long and they are allowed to keep doing this, so there must be nothing wrong. And so there certainly are repeat offenders, but then there's also people that, set up a shingle one day and are gone the next. And so there's both and everything in between.
Anyone else?
I have heard of quite a few within the Asian community that I represent primarily. Many of these agencies that I've had experiences with were in New York City. They open up, they're consulting agencies, they make multiple applications, they charge a lot of fees, and then usually close shop within a short period of time. Once they collect sufficient funds, we can no longer contact them. That brings up difficulties when we get the case and you're trying to find out the history of the case because there will be no one to turn to for the file.
One of the most disturbing things you said, Mr. Zinjin, was that not only are they victimized and their money taken, but then they face the risk of being actually fraudulent to the government, which is a double blow, if you would, which is amazing to me.
Yes, I personally had one or two cases where my client faced difficulties obtaining relief, immigration relief, because of that history. Because immigration can only see that my clients have committed the fraud. They cannot pinpoint anyone else's involvement because of lack of documentation.
Councilman O'Brien, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I've just been sitting here thinking about the recent Oscars, and Ms. Stein, I sit here thinking about who's going to play you in the movie. And I mean that sincerely. I think it's extraordinary, as the chairman said, that you as a student have built this infrastructure that we've come to know as the Notario Fraud Project. And you created a mission, you have a very forward-looking direction that continues to grow and evolve. And your testimony was compelling, as your passion is evident to everyone here. I would like to go to one part of your written testimony that identifies, one, those who represent or hold themselves out as immigration specialists or notario publico. And then there's the second that are running the multi-service businesses and say that they provide a whole listing of immigration services, including taxes, which is another issue. But finally, another is there are also those that are not charging money, but through the goodness of their heart, they're incompetent. They provide these services, which is not criminal, but it's just as damaging. The end result is the same. But in your written testimony, you look at some businesses that advertise one thing. They're like a travel agency. Can you amplify how that fictitious storefront or enterprise invites people into this fraud dilemma?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and actually...
That just sticks out to me, a travel agency.
And actually, victim one and victim two, the business that they went to was a private securities business, and so the way they found out about it was through word of mouth, and that's often the case. Now, in the case of travel agencies, I've heard that happening, and you may know more about this as well, but happening in the Eastern European community.
If you can amplify all those ways that they set up
and that's another
fictitious
challenge,
storefronts,
because how do you can maybe identify by people's storefronts, when they are, if they say immigration services, which they do in giant letters, just like drive down streets in North Philadelphia and South Philadelphia, in Upper Darby, in all these communities, they're not necessarily hiding it, but then some are hiding in plain sight where they advertise one thing, and that part of it can be because you would go to a travel agent in your home country to get a visa, and so it makes sense to do that here. And so that's part of it too, is sometimes they will appear to be doing something else, but because of assumptions based on people's experiences in another country, they believe they go to those businesses as well.
And if I can direct this to Mr. Weiss and Mr. Zinjin, I probably know the answer why there aren't any federal funds, but and that is because of any number of reasons. Can you make a compelling case why federal funds are important for the legal services of the immigrant community?
Sure, I'd be happy to speak to that. Yeah, unfortunately, since 1996, federal law prohibits the federal funding for provision of legal services to undocumented immigrants. And that's what happened in Philadelphia when you had this splitting up of community legal services and PLA, Philadelphia Legal Assistance. That was one of the reasons, is because of that law. And unfortunately, there's been work ever since that time to make availabilities of federal funds for provision of legal services, which there's been some movement, but not a whole lot. And when we think about the fact, I don't have the statistics with me, but immigration detention is the largest growing population of nationwide. And despite that fact, immigration violations are considered civil in nature, and so therefore, even though they risk arrest, detention, and deportation, they do not have a right to legal counsel. And so you have hundreds of thousands of individuals who are appearing in immigration court on a daily basis who go without counsel. And so there are a very limited what's called recognized agencies in Pennsylvania to provide free or low-cost immigration legal services. I mean, in Philadelphia, there's four agencies. There's Highest Nationality Service Center, Catholic Charities, and Esperanza to serve the entire city, essentially. And then there's a couple there's one in York, Pennsylvania. There's a couple of others, but that's it. And so, with very limited exceptions, there is some federal funding for immigrant victims of representing immigrant victims of domestic violence, but outside of that scope, there's none.
Would anybody else like to comment?
Just briefly, I think federal funding is extremely important for the immigrant community because immigration law might seem really simple on the surface, but it's actually rather complex. Even immigration attorneys, private practitioners, over the years of practice, we tend to specialize within the immigration field. So for an immigrant who has no one to turn to even go to a private attorney, oftentimes is a frustrating experience because they're sometimes turned away by attorneys saying, look, I do immigration work, but I specialize in this specific aspect of it. Many undocumented immigrants particularly will have very little understanding of what reliefs are really out there. And consultation costs could add up. They could go to different attorneys for one question and get no answer. So some sort of federal funding to help them get started in the process, to at least introduce them to the reliefs that may be available. They can always decide at that point, look, I want private representation or I want to use the various services available. There are more than enough immigrants out there who need the federal, and I think that's important because they're working for pennies on the dollar in hard labor jobs. They may not have the funds available to go and see private attorneys. So those people need to have assistance. Those are also probably one of the larger groups that are oftentimes scammed by the notarial services. And also to go back quickly to a question you asked earlier about travel agencies. My experience with clients going to travel agencies is their desire to be able to go home. Many immigrants have been here for 10 years, 8 years, or 20 years without the ability to visit home. When their parents pass away, when things happen back home, because they're undocumented, they cannot travel. So oftentimes, a travel agency in their own country, as mentioned earlier, would be the agency that could help you make those arrangements. And I think that leads them to those agencies and ask the question, look, how do I legally be able to go home and visit real fast? Thank you.
Thank you for adding the different levels to this very traumatic experience. That helps tremendously. Very briefly, could you identify necessary next steps that we may consider or the state or the federal level may be able to respond to?
If you could make one recommendation, what would it be?
It's hard to just make one recommendation,
Well,
but
no, he qualified it. I was going to say.
Yeah. I would say I think that what needs to happen is that, one, there needs to be more legal assistance for victims to bring civil complaints on an individual basis, because that is one way to start to fight back on the ground level when cases may not be appropriate or big enough for government agencies like the FTC or the Office of the Attorney General, the Consumer Protection Unit here in Pennsylvania, which also can bring complaints and cases. Beyond that, I would say that having a reporting system that is approachable for immigrants facing language barriers to go and talk to law enforcement about and make complaints is critical, because it's hard enough for people to come forward anyways, and then if there's language barriers or if the reporting system is not in a way that is efficient, it may deter people from utilizing those. And then I also think that a good start is the ordinance that you introduced last week, because it has been used in other cities, and while certainly it's not the only thing to do, it's certainly a way to try to start regulating some of these businesses in a way that will put them in line with the law and laws that they've been breaking.
Thank you, and thank you again for your compelling testimony.
So before you go, you're going to add to
Yeah,
that?
if I can ask, just do three maybe.
Right.
So first is having this hearing, just sitting here, seeing the different agencies interact in a way that may not be otherwise happening is a great first step, and I applaud it there. Secondly is funding. I'd like to talk not just about the federal funding, but also to really, one is, the community legal services, PLA, all desperately need additional funding. In order to also encourage them to represent individuals where they otherwise may think they cannot represent undocumented immigrants, they actually can. But currently the funding issue is one, obviously, that's a serious one for them. And finally, this issue is going to be raised tomorrow, but I feel I have to raise it today as well, is the police department spoke eloquently and correctly that victims are not reported to immigration. That's correct. But that is not what is being heard in the immigrant communities. And so no matter how much that is said, they all hear the story of my friend X, Y, or Z who got picked up and is now with immigration. And when you hear that, game's over. And so that's another really important issue.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to take what we heard today, and we are going to move on it. Again, I applaud my colleague for bringing this issue to light. Some of the things I heard was that we could actually petition the bar associations, whether it's the Hispanic bar or the Asian bar associations, to ask them to provide lists of attorneys that they know that can provide these services, and future attorneys as well, but also to provide this kind of legal assistance to that. So we're also looking at the license. Councilman O'Brien has introduced a bill to talk about a specified license that will address people who need to have some experience, at least in this. And another thing that I drew from it is making sure that if they don't put their name on it, I mean, that's a bellwether warning, if I ever heard one. They're not willing to affix their name, their license to practice this, then you should beware. So thank you all for the testimony, and we will adhere to some of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Will the clerk please read the final panel to testify?
Will Gonzalez, Arthur Reed.
Thank you both for your patience. We appreciate you sticking with us. Have a seat at the witness table and state your name and begin your testimony. Go ahead.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. My name is Will Gonzalez. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today and for organizing a public hearing on such an important topic. I am the Executive Director of SEBA, a coalition of Latino community-based organizations in Philadelphia. The members of SEBA are Concilio de Organizaciones Hispanas de Filadelfia, Finanta, the North Square Civic Association, and Nueva Esperanza. I am also the president of the Hispanic Bar Association of Pennsylvania. The Hispanic Bar Association of Pennsylvania supports what Vanessa Stein and Philip Weiss expressed earlier about the dangers that notarios pose to immigrants and the community through the unauthorized practice of law. As Executive Director of SEBA, however, I want to make you aware of another facet of notarial fraud, the harm that notarios do in the area of tax preparation services. This harm transcends the immigrant community. It affects everybody who files a tax return through a notario. Notarios present their offices as one-stop shops for various services. One of the services that you often see advertised by notarios is tax preparation. It is a natural extension of their scheme to defraud immigrants. It is important for immigrants to be current with their taxes. In general, filing tax returns are demonstrations of good moral character according to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. The USCIS application for naturalization specifically asks applicants, have you ever not filed a federal, state, or local tax return since you became a permanent resident? It is important for immigrants that their tax returns are filled out correctly. Tax returns reflect the makeup of a household, the marital status of the tax filers, the family's income sources, and a person's honesty in claiming certain tax credits. If a tax return does not jive with an application for naturalization in terms of household composition or the marital status of the taxpayer, for example, the USCIS may question the sincerity of the applicant. Immigrants sometimes go to notarios for tax preparation services even when they know that it is wise not to go to a notario for help with immigration services. For example, the unauthorized immigrant who knows well that there is no USCIS paperwork that a notario can fill out to change their immigration status in the U.S. They may go to a notario in the neighborhood because they need to file their taxes. Yes, unauthorized immigrants are required to file a tax return too, even when they are paid in cash. The IRS created the individual tax identification number so that people without social security numbers can file a tax return. Attached to the testimony that I provided in written form is a copy of our ITIN brochure to help you understand ITINs better. ITINs are the individual tax identification number. A badly prepared tax return or a return that requests credits for which the unauthorized immigrant is not eligible leads to a lot of trouble for the taxpayer. For example, we have seen notarios file tax returns for people with I-10s in which they request the earned income tax credit. The EITC can be worth up to $6,000 for families who worked in 2013. However, the IRS makes clear that people with I-10s are not eligible for the EITC, yet some notarios try to claim it for people and for unauthorized immigrants. In some cases, the IRS grants the EITC, sends a large refund check, and a few months later realizes the mistake. The IRS then requests a return of the money that it sent with penalties and interest. Another common problem that we have seen with notario-prepared tax returns for unauthorized immigrants are returns that claim the child tax credit for children who do not live with the taxpayer. Unauthorized immigrants are eligible for the child tax credit. However, like all other taxpayers, that credit is only available when the child lives with the taxpayer. Notarios will often improperly claim the credit on tax returns on which children living in Mexico are listed as dependents. A qualifying child whom the taxpayer supports in Mexico can be claimed as a dependent, but they cannot be claimed for the child tax credit. A special tax treaty between Mexico and the U.S. allows all taxpayers to claim the dependents living in Mexico. They can do so only if that dependent has an I-10 or a Social Security number. Preparing and submitting shoddy I-10 applications for dependents that live in Mexico is another area where we see the bad work of notarios. Preparing the I-10 application requires strict adherence to the IRS's application guidelines. We often see I-10 applications that are so poorly prepared that they are laughable were it not for the $250 to $300 preparation fees that notarios charge their victims. The work of notarios in preparing tax returns puts them in contact with U.S. citizens seeking help with their taxes. I am alluding to people who have no interest whatsoever in immigration matters. Notarios do damage here too, as the notarios ignore IRS standards of conduct and integrity for private tax preparers. They do not follow IRS guidelines in filling out forms, and they prepare tax returns which illegally claim dependents and tax credits or misrepresent filing status. That gets people in a lot of trouble, and the tax preparation fees are usually high. The fraudulent machinations of notarios also affect honest taxpayers who have never heard of notarios in their life. The filing of tax returns fraught with deceitful requests for refunds are fodder for opponents of the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit, and tax cuts for low to moderate income working people. Every year, people seeking to cut these important tax credits for low-wage workers bandy about cases of fraud in Washington, but cast the blame on taxpayers instead of the notarios, who are one of the main culprits in perpetrating tax preparation fraud. Some people say that clients should know better and that they may be accessories to the fraudulent tax return preparation by notarios. That is an easy characterization, as it ignores the complexities of the tax laws and regulations and how intimidating it is for the average person to prepare a tax return. It also ignores the professional responsibility that paid preparers are required to have. In many cases, taxpayers do not know that the notario prepared tax return they paid for is not prepared correctly. The sad thing is that by the time the client finds out about the problem, the notario may have disappeared from the community. The bottom line is this: notarios are not just a threat to matters relating to immigration, they do damage to people seeking help with their taxes, and this also affects U.S. citizens. We support City Council's resolution to investigate notario fraud and other forms of immigration consultant fraud in the City of Philadelphia. We also encourage City Council to continue to work with law enforcement to help them to devote more attention to notario fraud. We respectfully request that you include the IRS's Criminal Investigation Unit in your efforts to engage law enforcement in this area and to coordinate their resources to go after notario fraud. Thank you very much for your attention to this matter.
Thank you for your testimony. We have another witness to testify. Please state your name and begin your testimony, please.
My name is Arthur Reed. I'm general counsel of an organization called Friends of Farm Workers, which is at the moment located about a block from here. I've been practicing law for 37 years and representing immigrants for at least 35 of those 37 years, and have extensive experience with consumer fraud issues faced by immigrant communities, not only in this state, but in New York and in New Jersey, where I've also practiced. I've been here since 1981, but practiced in those other states as well. First, I'd just like to pick up on Will's last point and thank Will for bringing it up, because I think it's important also to realize that tax preparation interchange of the multi-service agency, let's call them that for the moment, with the immigrant community is often one of the gateways into the immigration representation as well. The kinds of questions that will be asked, even in incompetent preparation of taxes, are likely to result in identification of potential immigration issues involving someone coming in for tax preparation. And it is not unusual then for that tax preparer to in turn suggest that they may be in a position to help with other problems related to immigration as well. At times, that takes the form of referrals to, or alleged referrals to attorneys, and kickback arrangements between non-attorneys and attorneys in relation to this, some of which gets into a different issue, and an important one of sort of the relationship between, I will simply say, less than competent attorneys involved in this who at times are allied with the unauthorized practice of law. I should note, just as a purely legal matter, that an attorney who assists the unauthorized practice of law is in fact committing a violation, an ethical violation that's a disciplinary action against that attorney as well. The bottom line, though, and I've given you a fairly extensive written testimony talking about the various legal approaches towards this, I think given that we're at least an hour past when the committee anticipated being here, let me focus on some pretty concrete suggestions about what would be useful to do. Number one, I have been raising this specific issue for close to 10 years within the city of Philadelphia, with the district attorney's office, with the attorney general's office, with the Department of State, and with the FTC. We're part of why the FTC came to Pennsylvania originally to talk about this a number of years ago. It is distressing to hear from the police that they have not yet been able to recognize and categorize any complaints that they've received that relate to this issue. And I think it goes to the fundamental problem. And the fundamental problem is that the nature of the immigration fraud, notario fraud problem requires a more comprehensive approach. I think the district attorney's office working with the police could set up a more appropriate procedure for identifying who would be investigative targets. The reality is that the victims of immigration fraud may themselves not be the most effective witnesses, and that a police investigation that involved use of undercover sources or otherwise might in fact be a much more appropriate way to tackle the serious problems involving major problems. Our biggest problem is that this is a subset of the jurisdiction of a series of state and federal agencies, none of which have prioritized this as a critical issue, at least within Pennsylvania, to take on. The Attorney General's office does not have its civil division and its criminal division talk with each other about this issue. We have 67 different district attorneys in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and there is a role which the District Attorneys Association could play statewide. There's a role which the Attorney General's office could play statewide. But it's also important for those of us who represent immigrants to realize that there are district attorneys in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania who would be much more likely to prosecute the immigrants coming forward who are victims of immigration fraud than they would the people who are preying on them. And so in many counties in this Commonwealth, it is very unwise to send a victim of immigration fraud to local police or to a district attorney, because the reality is that you will only be compounding the problems that they're facing. So I think that there is a critical role which the city could play in trying to step forward and play a role of brokering some of the different jurisdiction between different agencies, in playing a role in realizing that sending people to a particular detective precinct in a particular place without this being coded in a way in which it's going to be handled appropriately is not going to be the effective way to deal with it. There are those of us who have identified by name abusers for 10 years. They have been identified to different state and federal agencies, and no one has taken on that issue. There is an important role that could be played by the federal government here, too. And I think, again, that's something where the city could assist in trying to identify the kinds of circumstances under which there might be federal investigative resources that are also appropriately brought to bear. Some of the tax preparers who Will's talked about have also been involved in money laundering schemes involving Western Union and a series of other things involving international transfers of funds. At least one of them was indicted by the U.S. Attorney's Office here, who was also one of the ones who was preying on immigrant communities in Chester County around some of the immigration issues as well. My suggestion would be that we need a task force that looks at these issues in a comprehensive way, looks at them, as Vanessa alluded to earlier. Many of the practitioners of this are doing this on a basis beyond the city of Philadelphia. So we have a regional problem to deal with. The people who are engaged in immigration fraud may find it helpful to be based in Philadelphia, may do some of their practices in Philadelphia, but they are drawing upon a larger immigrant community, Montgomery County, Chester County, Berks County, as well as agencies locally that may be preying on those communities. But it's important to realize that for a lot of reasons, including the presence of the USCIS and immigration offices in Philadelphia, this is a central point for much of the potential for fraud of those communities. One other issue of consequence, I do think the mayor's office could be helpful in this, and that is, this is not, absolutely is not just a Latino issue. This is an issue that crosses the multiple immigrant communities and looks different in different immigrant communities. One of the cases that was recently referred to the Pennsylvania Bar Unauthorized Practice of Law Committee involved a Ukrainian immigrant from Philadelphia who went to seek assistance in tax preparation and was in fact instead then along the line also given some unauthorized practice of law by a notary public that led to nothing. Took their money but didn't do what it is they said that they were going to do with consequences for that individual. So it is important to approach this in a comprehensive way. I would turn to Councilman O'Brien, your legislation. I think there are a number of excellent ideas in there. I think that there are some ways in which it would be useful to look at some other issues relating to advertising, relating to signage. Some years ago when people used the yellow pages more, I actually literally just went through the number of places that mentioned immigration services in the yellow pages, and they were considerable within the city of Philadelphia. My office used to be located at 9th and Cherry in Philadelphia, and a place opened up on that block that says immigration services, and there's no attorney associated with that office. So I think that one of the things that could also be appropriately looked at is signage. I would say that that the principal focus in reality of the legislation will probably be to help those that I think at least one of the prior witnesses identified, those who don't intend to do ill, but do so without realizing what they're doing. It probably will not address the most serious actors, because the most serious actors are not likely to come in compliance with this any more than they will come in compliance with the other things they're not doing. Nonetheless, it's a tool, and it's a tool that could be very useful if used in a coordinated and comprehensive way with other legal approaches towards remedying the problems of those communities. So again, bottom line would be better coordination, some serious funding for the language access in an outreach context. We are talking about 50 languages used in the court system in Philadelphia. I haven't heard anyone talking about outreach in anywhere approaching that number of languages in any way, and yet we have to realize that there are many immigrant communities that we will not reach if we don't have the accessibility of language services to help those individuals. And I'd be happy to answer more questions, but it is late.
No, thank you very much. And Mr. Gonzalez, thank you for your articulation of the issue involving tax returns. It really puts a face on those who are trying to find a legal pathway to citizenship. And then your added testimony to that's where they become victimized because they trust the tax preparer, and then they're kind of seduced into accessing and paying for other immigration services that are less than standard. I'd like to go through that checklist if I can. The unauthorized practice of law is an issue that probably could be brought before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court Disciplinary Board, but it also...
Well, no, it could only, the unauthorized practice of law can, the only issue that the Supreme Court can deal with is when a person who is licensed as an attorney in Pennsylvania. And actually, one of the complexities of this issue is because the practice of immigration law is federal, many of the attorneys who practice immigration law legally in Pennsylvania are not licensed by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They are instead licensed in other jurisdictions. One of the other interesting aspects of this issue from a consumer perspective of simply, can I look up whether this person is an attorney or not? If you simply look on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court website, you will not find some of the people who are licensed attorneys because they're licensed in other states. A different problem and a complex one. But the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has no authority over the notary, the person who is not an attorney.
Right, I understand that. I understand that. How about the sharing of fees?
Absolutely. If it is possible to establish the role of the attorney in the sharing of fees, the referral, the fronting, all of those kinds of things are absolutely things in which there are disciplinary actions against attorneys as well.
Okay. In my previous life, I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee in Harrisburg and have a relationship with the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association and the Attorney General's office. Perhaps you can help us fashion an agenda that we may be able to submit to them for consideration in one of their committees and one of their quarterly meetings.
I think that would be an excellent idea, one that we've been trying to work on for a while. I would also add the role of the Department of State in that process. As you are aware, or I know your staff is aware, we did successfully get the Pennsylvania legislature to amend the notary law last October. Unfortunately, and your staffer was correct, it appears that the legislation will not go into effect until sometime in 2015 because of the way in which the law was written in the regulation process before it goes into effect. But that, again, from the point of view of at least the lawful notary, the person who accidentally does this, spells out much more clearly exactly what the Pennsylvania Bar said in our opinion on unauthorized practice of law. Holding yourself out as being competent to provide any advice in relation to immigration law, calling yourself a notario publico, are each acts that involve the unauthorized practice of law themselves. And this makes it very clear to somebody who wants to be in compliance that you must clearly disclaim that you are an attorney, that you have those competence, and you must limit what it is you do. Again, the legislation that you talked about potentially is very helpful in that regard as well. The posting of fees, for example, was one of the things I think that was in your legislation. The status of that the Immigration Service recognizes for practice of law is if you charge other than a nominal fee. So if you charge $5 to notarize a document and you want $500 to notarize an immigration document, something else is at work there than the mere practice of being a notary. And those are the kinds of things that, again, at least in terms of controlling some of the marginally, the people who are not intending to rip people off or don't at least want to be documented as intending to rip people off, it will be helpful to have some of that kind of information. And again, if the penalties are strict enough, it may be something that could prevent people from deciding to take on these issues.
Thank you. I, again, would like to thank you for your testimony. The ordinance that we've introduced will necessitate a further hearing and delineation of those important issues that you've alluded to. I would like to give a shout out to Miriam Enriquez for all the hard work that she's done in coordinating this effort. I know she's probably hiding her face behind me at this moment, but this is a formidable issue that she has taken and passionately advocated for, and I want to thank all of you for your compelling testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that are there any other individuals seeking recognition? Seeing none, this committee hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.